you worked out what you're going to wear for the coronation? Because you can't just turn up wearing anything.
When you say turn up,
Yeah.
are you going somewhere?
No. I mean, you're just in your front room. Are you going to?
I can turn up in my front room in anything I want.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
Yes. So I'm going to wear a Comsat Angels T-shirt.
Yeah.
A pair of roomy shorts
Mm-hmm.
and a hat at a jaunty ankle.
I think that's very good.
Yeah.
A lot, yeah, because this is our pre-coronation edition.
I hadn't thought of
the
it
show.
that way.
No.
But is there a dish, like coronation chicken? Is there a dish for this coronation?
I've noticed that coronation chicken is turning up in lots of sort of the traditional coronation chicken. I think there is. I think there. I don't think
do we know what it is?
It's very complicated, I think.
Is it something? Forgive me. This is not
Yes.
Is Charles? Is he vegetarian?
I don't know.
Was he not? He talked to plants for a while, didn't he?
Well, he's been an eco kind of guy.
Yeah.
To be honest, before it was kind of cool, he was talking about this kind of stuff for quite a while.
Yeah, no, I mean, I wasn't asking sarcastically. I was asking because I have a memory of that being the case, but then I remember loads of things that aren't the case. Like I remember that we landed on Mars, but apparently that never happened.
Did I tell you I wrote to him?
No.
I wrote to him when I'd done Mad Blood Stirring, which, as you know, is set in Dartmoor Prison, where he kind of owns Dartmoor Prison and all the land around there. So I wrote to him and said, because this is the place where the first Black Shakespeare was ever produced in this country, there should be some kind of, like a plaque or something which just, even though it's still a prison, there should be something that acknowledges its cultural significance.
Does he own it as part of the Duchy of whatever it is?
It's part of his, it's in his gift. Maybe it's been passed on to the new... Anyway, so first of all, one of his henchmen replied, which was very nice.
I don't think henchman is the word you're looking for.
And I sent him a copy of the book. Anyway, then the next thing, he wrote me a letter saying...
Sorry, you have a letter from the king?
He was Prince Charles at the time, saying, thank you very much. I enjoyed reading your book. And
did he say, love the podcast, Steve?
If only he'd done that as a PS, I might have brought it in. But he was basically suggesting that Dartmoor Prison won't be long for this world. So it's pretty ancient.
Okay, but did he say it's too ancient to put a plaque on?
I think he was just saying this.
You said if we put a plaque on it, it'll fall down.
Yes, I think that's probably right. Anyway,
I'm sorry. I'm surprised. Firstly, that you had the initiative to do that, and secondly, that you got a reply. I always imagined that my whole version of writing letters to anything of any importance was when I was young. I wrote a letter to the BBC, which said, "Dear BBC, I love Star Trek. Can you get me Leonard Nimoy's autograph?" And they wrote back and they said, "We don't film it here." You see, I thought that it was on the BBC.
Therefore,
that's right. That William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy lived in, Broadcasting House or Television Centre, but they did write back and say we don't make it.
At least someone wrote back.
Yeah, precisely so.
Nice.
Yeah, it was and then my mum wrote to Michael Crawford because for my 11th birthday or something, I got taken to see Billy Liar. Billy, it was called, wasn't it? The stage show.
I think so.
Yeah, but I think it was the stage show was just called Billy, and the poster was him with a bunch of balloons and ambrosia and all that stuff. And it was a big trip, and I was taken to the theatre because I loved Some Mothers Do Have 'Em. So I knew that he was on in the West End. So my mum said she would take me and my best friend Chris Dry to the theatre to see Billy. I think he'd seen it already. Anyway, and then she wrote to Michael Crawford to ask if he could send an autograph, and Michael Crawford sent back not only an autograph for me, but an autograph for my mum.
Oh, that's very nice.
So my mum had a copy of Michael, a signed photograph. We had matching signed photographs of Michael Crawford.
That's a very lovely.
Yeah, that was really, really nice.
Will you be pledging your allegiance during the coronation? I think we should do it, okay? Here's what I think we should say.
Doing that.
Here's what I think we should say. I've written it down.
Okay.
I pledge allegiance to the band of Mr. Schneebly. so when this bit in the service comes up, it'll be the Archbishop.
That's great. We'll do that, yeah.
Okay, you say this. I pledge allegiance to the band of Mr. Schneebly and will not fight him for creative control and will defer to him on all issues related to the musical direction of the band.
That's it. Okay. let's do that.
Yes.
Fine.
When it comes to that bit, this is our suggestion to the vanguardista, is that when the allegiance comes up, you pledge allegiance to the band. Is that disrespectful? Is that
no? I think that's very good. That's actually a very, very good thing, because you're not hardcore unless you live hardcore.
That's right. And then the Archbishop of Canterbury should stand up at the end and instead of doing the blessing, should say, "God of Rock, thank you for this chance to kick ass. Please give us the power to blow people's minds with high voltage rock." Wouldn't that be fantastic? Just passing that on. What's coming up later on the show?
I've got to gather myself now. We're going to be doing reviews of, I'm sorry about that, Looking for Soul, Blue Caftan, and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. And our guest will be Ari Aster, director of Her Head Hit a Tree, and also... which is still a great joke.
Midsommar. Now Beau is afraid, so we'll talk to Ari a bit later on.
Do you know why Beau is afraid? Because he heard me say Midsommar.
To be honest, I'm afraid that if we start the interview with Ari by saying, who is Beau and why is he afraid?
We won't get anywhere.
That will be kind of like the end of all time. On Extra Takes, another 90 minutes of this complete nonsense, more than double this thing. Extra reviews, Mark, what's going to be in the extra review section?
We have Pomfear and Harker, both of which are very interesting films.
Pomfear and Harker sounds like an upscale and overpriced luxury candle brand, but that's worth aspiring to. Pretentious Moi, currently Mark Kermode 13 versus Mark Kermode 11.
Did you give me the half point last week? You did.
Shrink the Box with Ben Babysmith and Sasha Bates is also ad-free on Tuesdays alongside all your other extra content on the Take channel. You can support us via Apple Podcasts or head to extratakes.com for non-fruit-related devices. If you're already a vanguardista, as always, we salute you. Dear Grendel and Grendel's mum, says David Hopkins.
Very good.
This week's email regarding the unusual letters in modern Scandinavian languages, and particularly the A and E pushed together... reminded me of my times spent studying Old English poetry, which also features similarly unfamiliar characters.
I spent time doing Old English poetry.
Did it help?
If the hood is youth and he lifted off the floor with the battle of the Fludemuden.
There was a worthy man.
That's middle.
Oh, okay. The aforementioned A and E is usually referred to as ash and is the same hard A sound as in hat. But one can also employ eth, a soft th sound as in bath or thorn, a harder th as in thistle or thud. A capital thorn looks like a bit like a Y if you squint a bit, and so is responsible for the erroneous belief propagated by ye old coffee shoppy owners that ye was ever an old version of the. This may seem inconsequential, of course, but sooner or later someone will make a version of Beowulf in the original language, at which point it will be invaluable. Thank you. Still confused, but always useful.
Have you ever read The Battle of Maldon?
No.
The Battle of Maldon basically has many, many stanzas that go, and then the men who were on the inside said sayingly with words that came forth from their mouth to the men who were on the outside that heard the men on the inside say the words that were sayingly said forth from their mouths on the outside. But those who were outside wanted to be, and it goes like the...
Is that on Led Zepp 3?
It is on Led Zepp, yes, right, yes. It's on the director's cut of that, yeah.
Lisa Gilhooly, possibly Jill Hooley, but Lisa Gilhooly is what I'm going for. We're in trouble.
Oh.
Mark and Simon.
Oh dear.
I am not a member of the church, but my husband is.
Oh dear.
Basically, your podcast, or more accurately, your scathing review of Leap Year, is ruining my marriage.
It was years ago.
I wanted to watch Leap Year with my husband. He said no. Mark and Simon said it was terrible. Yes, I agreed. I doubt it was a masterpiece, but it looked like a cute romantic movie, and I wanted to watch it. He refused. It's been nearly a year. I have seen it 5 times, and he still refuses to watch. I read this message to him up to this point, and he was so horrified that I'd seen it 5 times that the rest of the message was moot, and he is now questioning my sanity. I just wanted to watch a romantic movie with my husband. We are at an impasse, and he will only listen to you. He says, if you read this on air, he will watch the movie. His fate is in your hands. Well, we've just read it. Read it on air, so
enjoy Leapy Ear. And let me just remind you that we watched Leapy Ear because the star of the film was going to come on the show.
Yes.
And then decided not to because their opinion of the film seemed to be much the same as ours.
But it's not worth spoiling a marriage.
No,
so,
it's not. No, good.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, you could just watch the trailer, which has the whole film in it, but in about 3 minutes.
But watching it I don't suppose anyone involved with the film has watched it 5 times, Lisa, as much as you
most
have.
people involved with it haven't watched it 1 time.
Why would you watch it 5 times?
Well, hey, look, multiplicity of opinion is a wonderful thing. And I love the fact that we have just saved a marriage by the simple act of you reading out an email.
Yes. Good deed for the day.
Yes.
Lisa, we appreciate you getting in touch. We hope you enjoy the co-watch. And basically, your other half needs to get in touch with a review, I think.
Yes, it does.
Next week.
If I'm remembering correctly, it does include the line, "It is not a load of old poo," which the answer is...
Doesn't someone say top of the morning? Isn't it one of those kind of really terrible...
It's absolutely full of people begorring and, mumbling.
Anyway, we'll take a review next week, please, as your part and penance. Okay, so, yes, Ari Aster is going to be coming up shortly. But first of all, here's a review.
Return to Seoul, which is a really, really interesting film, directed by David Cho, who is a filmmaker who made a big splash in Cannes with Diamond Island. He's a Cambodian-French filmmaker, and he decided that he wanted to make a movie about a Korean adoptee. He had met somebody who had told him a story, and he'd become sort of very interested in it. The life of script consultant Laura Badulf actually very much influences his script. And he was looking for somebody who was French but from Korea, and he couldn't find an actor. And then somebody said, I have a visual artist who is a friend called Park Ji-min, who was born in Korea and moved to France as a child. She has no acting experience at all, but you might want to talk to her because she's very much like the character you're talking about. They then had this intense period of collaboration, and they made this film, which ended up being Cambodia's entry for the 95th Academy Awards. I think it made the shorter version of the long list. So she plays Freddie. We first meet her when she arrives in Seoul, apparently accidentally. We learn later on that she was meant to be going to Tokyo, but all the flights were grounded. So she decided on a whim to go to Seoul. She had said to her adoptive parents that at some point they would go back to Korea together, but she's now done this completely on a whim. She meets a woman who is the clerk at the hotel, who sort of sees her as a sort of lost soul and takes her under her wing, and then very quickly discovers that on the one hand she may look vulnerable, but she is also this kind of agent of chaos who takes great pleasure in upturning the sort of social mores and the polite behaviour of the society into which she's landed. Here's a clip.
1 bottle of soju, please. No, 2.
네, 소주 2병이랑 닭발 한 접시 주세요. 네.
친구분이 굉장히 특이하시네요.
어떤 게요?
My name, 지환.
감사합니다.
Where are you from?
France.
France?
France.
아, 프랑스. 프랑스.
파리바게뜨. C'est une chaîne de boulangerie très connue en Corée.
프랑스 사람 같진 않은데.
아, 그게 무슨 상관이야? 자, 우리 만났으니까 짠 한번.
So one of the lines in there is that the people that she's with says she doesn't look French. And then that conversation then becomes, no, she looks Korean. She has actually an old-fashioned Korean face, a pure Korean face. And they start talking to her about the fact that she is Korean. And then she goes to the adoption agency, almost on a whim, turns up completely sort of unannounced, and very quickly finds that it's possible to locate her birth father, but not her birth mother. And then there's a question about whether or not she should meet her biological father, which she does, again, without any form of preparation, not able to speak the language or understand the culture. And she is accompanied by this new friend who sort of is acting as a translator, but finds herself thrown into this very kind of, very complex situation. The rest of the film then plays out over the best part of a decade with gaps in the narrative of, a couple of years, sometimes longer than that, in which we see this central character who discovers fairly early on that her original Korean name was Yoon-hee, which apparently means docile. And she is anything but docile. She's, docile and joyful. And she is actually this character who's sort of seething with contradictions, full of energy, very, very creative, but also given to bursts of out-of-context dancing and chaos creating, which seems to be something that she does whenever anybody gets close to her. And what you start to see is this portrait of somebody whose sense of identity is in a state of flux and is confused about who they are and about whether or not it's possible. Like when she meets her biological father, he immediately goes into this kind of drunken thing about, you must come back, you are Korean, you must live here. And she's going, no, I'm French. But he immediately wants her back within the bosom of the family. And meanwhile, the mother is still failing to respond to the telegrams that are sent to her. And what's really fascinating is that over the course of this drama, as I said, plays out over the best part of a decade, we see this central character try on different identities and variously adapt herself and her personality as if she is trying to find an identity that fits her, when she's a very, very mercurial character. And she is played, as I said, by Park Ji-min, who has never acted before in her life and apparently was very, very proactive in the script. When she got the script originally from the writer-director, she said there was a whole lot of things about it that she didn't like. There was a whole lot of things in it that she thought were cliched, a whole lot of descriptions of her character that she said, no, she wouldn't do that, she would do this. And they worked very intensely together. So the character that you see created on screen is absolutely a collaboration between a director who's, got a good track record and whose previous dramatic feature played very, very well in Cannes, as did this. And somebody who is a visual artist who never intended to be an actor, but who took the project on and who threw herself into, and you look at it and you go, I cannot believe that is the first time that she has acted. I mean, over the course of the 10 years, her character transforms so many times, and everything about the transformation is completely convincing, and you're swept up in it. The film makes brilliant use of music. As I said, one of the things that she does is she's kind of given to these bursts of dancing. And there's at one point she dances to this techno track, which has this thumping chorus, which says, I don't need anybody. And I never needed anybody. I never needed anybody. And she's sort of swirling around. And it's kind of ironic because she looks like she's being happy and joyous, but in fact, what she appears to be doing is sort of swirling to kind of shut the world outside her out. And then her character goes through a complete sort of transformation in terms of what she is and what she does and the people with whom she is close. And all the way through it, you get this sense of, firstly, this is one person who I can see developing over the course of this. Secondly, the cross-cultural complexity of this. They're having conversations in French, Korean, English. You heard even in that clip, they're sort of jumping between languages. And the different identities that she manages to embody, I thought it was breathtaking. The music is really, really well done. There's a lovely moment in which the father attempts to communicate with his daughter, the biological father attempts to communicate with his daughter by playing her a piece of music that he wrote. And it's kind of like the language can't do this, but the piece of music might be able to. And then it's also very, very aware of the fact that there's a conversation that she has with her mother, her adoptive mother, back home in France, who says, we always said we would go to Korea together, and is clearly very, very wounded by the fact that her daughter has suddenly just gone off and done this walk back into her past, apparently on a whim. Anyway, I thought it was terrific. I thought it was like a kind of a trance of a movie. It's called Return to Seoul, and see it on the big screen because it looks beautiful as well. The way in which it's shot is very, very important to the feel of it. I thought it was really great.
It sounds compelling.
It is.
A definite watch. Okay, Return to Seoul. Still to come. What else are we going to be looking at?
We're going to be reviewing Guardians of the Galaxy 3, yes, which is the third chapter in the Guardians of the Galaxy. It's volume 3 as opposed to chapter 3. And we are going to be talking to our very special guest,
who is Ari Aster, talking about his new movie, Beau is Afraid. We won't be saying, why is Beau afraid? Because we won't get anywhere. We're going to be back before you can say, lisons et dansons ces deux amusants ne feront jamais de mal au monde.
Remind me.
Let us read and let us dance. These two amusements will never do any harm to the world.
Voltaire?
Voltaire again. Spot on.
All the hits.
And we're back. Ari Aster coming up very shortly. Box office top 10, first of all, at 41. Little Richard, I Am Everything.
Which I thought was terrific. I mean, this is the Lisa Cortez documentary, which is not to be confused with the documentary which is currently on BBC iPlayer, which is Little Richard, King and Queen of Rock and Roll, with which there is some crossover. But I think this is a really fascinating portrait of a really brilliantly exciting, groundbreaking artist, and this looks at his career very much through kind of a queer theory lens, and and says, what if everyone just accepted that rock and roll was in fact created by a black queer icon, and what does that then tell us about the culture in which all that stuff happened? Also, it's just got loads and loads of fabulous fragments of interviews with Little Richard, who never appeared to do a boring interview. I mean, he was torn between rock and roll and religion, but every time he did an interview, he just went off on one.
Number 11 here and number 11 in the States, Big George Foreman, the miraculous story of the once and future heavyweight champion of the world.
Which, as we discovered last week, despite the fact that both you and I thought that we knew, a certain amount about boxing history, you said, I know about the Rumble in the Jungle, and then demonstrated that you didn't.
Correct.
For me, watching this film, I didn't know any of this story at all. So every single match, I was like, is that how it finishes? I didn't know that.
Number 10 is Missing,
which I haven't seen.
Polite Society is at number 9.
So the best way of describing Polite Society is that it is a British satire, Bollywood fantasy, Asian martial arts heist movie with a science fiction Cronenbergian twist at the end and songs. And despite how chaotic that sounds, it's actually pretty good fun. And it's got a sort of anarchic, chaotic energy that I think works rather well. And I have thought about it a lot since. I remember when I saw it, there were certain moments when I was going, what genre are we in now? Where is this film going to? So it pinballs all over the place, but it's very entertaining.
Number 9, so Daniel Savage on the number 9 movie, Polite Society, thoroughly enjoyed it, full of charm, laughs and great stunts from start to finish, gets a bit bonkers at the end.
A bit bonkers understates how bonkers it gets in the end.
But that's no bad thing, no. Thought Priya Kansara and Ritu Arya were superb.
Yeah.
Air is at number 8.
Well, I like Ben Affleck, I like Matt Damon. I'll say the same thing again. It's a story about licensing a shoe. I know other people have found more in it than that. I mean, whilst I was watching it, I was enjoying the sort of, the bromance conversations between these businessmen doing this stuff. But it's a story of a shoe.
Number 7 in the UK, number 4 in the States, Star Wars Episode 6, Return of the Jedi, brackets 40th anniversary. This is an email from Elliot.
This re-release intended to make us all feel really old.
I just wanted to say that I was one of what I hope were many people getting to see Return of the Jedi on the big screen this weekend. I hope there were others, but the midday screening I popped into, Brixton's Ritzy, in the biggest room, had an audience of 1, which was me. How surreal to have a room that size to myself. It was possibly the best and most relaxing cinema experience I've ever had. I had no concerns about bad behaviour by other audience members. I was able to have exactly the seat I liked and that no one else would be in it. It was a massive screen. I had no anxiety about my chocolate bar wrapper noise being too annoying for anyone. Also, it being Return of the Jedi, I had no anxieties about the characters on screen. About Jedi itself, a solid, very 80s action-adventure romp, elevated by the creature effects and Ian McDermott's Emperor more than anything else. The Ewoks look spectacular in some shots, but like children in suits in other shots. But hey-ho, being of a certain generation, the original Star Wars remains the only one I've not managed to see in the cinema now. Can any other listeners recount screenings attended where they were the only attendee? Okay, Well, that's for future programs. But that would have been a great experience, particularly if you're anxious about other things that can happen. If it's just you, which you're used to, and I've done it as well, because you go to these screenings which are put on for you.
Yeah, there is the great privilege of going to the press screening. Can I just tell you the trivia thing about Return of the Jedi is that one of the people that George Lucas asked to direct it was David Lynch. And David Lynch tells this story about going out to George Lucas's ranch and the Skywalker or whatever it's called. And when he got there, he immediately developed a migraine. And then for the whole of the meeting, when George was showing him all the characters and the toys and the Ewoks and something, David Lynch's migraine just got worse and worse and worse. And then he had to leave.
Yeah. I don't think that's a perfect combination.
It's a bunch of Muppets, isn't it? But,
I remember queuing in there's a Starbucks near Broadcasting House. And
there is.
And I remember joining the queue, and 3 in front of me was Ian McDermott, who has such a distinctive profile, of course, because that's the profile is kind of what lets you know. Yeah. And the guy behind, who was serving said, "Name." And he could have had so much fun at that point, but he did just say Ian. I wanted him to do the full kind of emperor thing. Anyway, Star Wars is at 7. Number 6 is John Wick Chapter 4.
Which you and I both enjoyed very, very much. And that's a 3-hour movie that the time flies by.
Number 5 here, 6 in America, Dungeons & Dragons, Honor Among Thieves.
Doing very, very well and good for it. So much more fun than we had any right to expect. So, yeah, really enjoyed it.
Ponniyin Selvan 2 is at number 4.
Haven't seen it because it wasn't press screen, but I imagine we may get some emails about it in the next week or so.
Well, I got one here, actually.
Oh, great. Brilliant.
From Ross. Dear Rocket and Raccoon, medium-term listener, first-time caller. South Asian cinema has been gaining a lot of international attention in the past few years, thanks to the incredible success of RRR, but also films like Gangubai Kathiawadi,
which is one of my favourite films of last year. Absolutely fantastic film, and one of the very few films to include a shot of a 1956 Dodge Coronet,
which I know Mark was a big
fan of.
And Pathan, which broke all sorts of box office records back in January. Ponniyin Selvan Parts 1 and 2 are of a different mould to all of those films, however, an epic 2-part book adaptation of one of India's most celebrated works of fiction. To say that these films are a triumph is a little bit of an understatement. It's wonderful to see such vision and style executed in a way that's equal parts exciting and complex. And director Mani Ratnam has outdone himself bringing this adaptation to life. It's not a surprise then, given that he's been trying to get this book adapted since as early as 1994, that the film seems so carefully planned. The cast also turn out excellent performances. Special mention going to Vikram and Aishwarya Rai Bachchan for one particular climactic moment in the film that I shall not spoil here. Needless to say, it's been one of the best times I've had at the movies this year, and that includes The Pope's Exorcist, although for entirely different reasons. If the duology needs summarising for the layman, then imagine a sort of Game of Thrones if it was Tamil originally and didn't have an ending so dire that it removed itself from the pop culture canon for a few years. This is very easy to recommend, provided that A, you've seen the first one, available on a streaming service near you, and B, can get over the fact it's not in English and therefore it's a little tricky to follow all the place names and character names as they are quite long. Up with the subtitles, down with people that don't like foreign films and all the other usual stuff from Ross. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I feel that my job has been done.
Box office number 3 here in America, not so. Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry. Mohammed Shakir says, I watched Harold Fry yesterday expecting a more uplifting and upbeat film. Definitely far more complex than that, with wonderful central performances. Though it didn't meet my expectations, I still enjoyed it.
Didn't meet expectations in terms of what it was, as opposed to
what he was hoping for.
Okay,
maybe.
I mean, the Penelope Wilton interview is on the last podcast. Do listen to it because it's terrific. As is her further interview on Take 2, in which she sort of she answers questions unrelated to Harold Fry. I liked it. I mean, I was surprised by how much it stayed with me, because when you're watching it, it feels very kind of incidental, very kind of, light on its feet. And then later on, it's like, oh, okay, fine. It had stuck around with me.
Penelope Wilton, particularly interesting on filming in South Africa with Richard Attenborough. I thought was fascinating.
Yeah.
Number 2 here and number 2 in the States, Evil Dead Rise.
Now, I promised I'd go and see it, and I was going to, but I didn't, because on the Tuesday morning that I was going to go and see it, you and I ended up watching 3 hours of Beau is Afraid. So I have seen The Pope's Exorcist, but that's now departed from the top 10, which is bizarre, because I thought,
what a success that was.
So Russell Crowe, Showgirls with Demons, surely that's a smash hit.
Anyway, Jude has seen it. Says,
I'm looking forward to it.
As a massive Evil Dead fan, my favourite film of all time is Evil Dead 2.
Okay.
I was hesitant about Evil Dead Rise, especially as I wasn't the biggest fan of the 2013 remake by Fede Alvarez.
Yeah.
And I've always been worried about it if the franchise can survive without Bruce Campbell's Ash, given the 3 movies and a show, which is one of my favourite shows ever. However, Lee Cronin and co. completely proved me wrong. I loved Evil Dead Rise.
Yeah.
It's got the grittiness and the gore of the original 1981 film and the 2013 film, though not as violent, but still has some of the goofiness of ED2 and Army of Darkness, perfectly blending the two so as to keep me entertained. Thought the cast did a great job, especially Neil Fisher as Cassie, because I'm always surprised when a child actor does a great job. But Alyssa Sutherland deserves the biggest shout out for her performance as the deadite version of Ellie. She scared me no end. Lily Sullivan and the rest of the cast deserve their props too. Evil Dead can be such a physically taxing franchise, and they nailed what they needed to do. To sum it up, it showed up, impressed the hell out of me, and has become my favourite film of the year so far. Well, it has to be to make me send an email about it. Can't believe this was almost going to go straight to streaming, apparently, because it fully deserved the big screen release. Bring on the Ash, Mia, Beth crossover film. P.S. Hoping to see Mark back at Queen's Film Theatre this October.
We'll be
Thank
back,
you
absolutely.
From Jude. So it sounds as though you're going to enjoy.
No,
Evil
I am
Dead
really
Rise.
looking forward to it. In fact, I've got, for reasons which I won't go into, I've got a costume fitting that I have to do this afternoon. And if I can get out of that early enough, I will go and see this evening because I am really excited.
Is it like a fancy dress costume?
It's a thing. I'll tell you about it another time.
Are you would we recognize you, or are you going to be like...
I hope so.
Is it cosplay?
It is cosplay. Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah, guess what? I'm going to a Comic-Con and I'm going to dress as my favourite character. I'm going to dress as Father Karras. Oh no, I do that anyway.
Okay, that's very good. And number one in the States, the Super Mario Brothers movie.
Yeah, we're again, total amount of money at the moment.
Go on, what? On the
45, 780, 59.
You're just making numbers up now. You
read that figure out.
45,780,596 pounds.
It's an astonishing amount of money for a film which is very mediocre. I mean, fine, but very mediocre. And again, I would refer back to, Robbie Collin of This Parish made the same point. What that success tells you is that there is a gaping hole in the market for kids' movies.
Now, today's guest is the writer and director of the A24 horror films Hereditary from 2018, Midsommar 2019, and his new film is Beau is Afraid. Ari Aster, of course. You'll hear me and Mark having a chat with from Beau is Afraid, written and directed by Ari Aster. I'm delighted to say Ari joins us. Are you in Germany, Ari?
Yeah, I'm on the last legs of this Europe tour and leaving today, actually.
Okay. How much do you enjoy doing the promotion for your movies?
On a scale from 1 to 10, maybe around a 3 or a 4.
Why is it so? Because I know because you've said it before. And I've watched lots of interviews with you, and it's clearly not the thing that you enjoy doing the most. But why is that? Because some directors, they can't wait to tell us their story. Is it just that we should be judging you by your movies rather than what you say about your movies?
Yeah, that's it. If anything, it's that I find the press part of all this very perilous, because anything I say, I can only regret. There's never a feeling, right? I'm so glad I said that. That's really going to help somebody, take this movie in. I'm only providing potential obstacles for people, I feel, by saying anything.
Okay. Well, having prefixed our conversation with that.
It was great to speak to you.
Yes.
Bye.
Can I invite you to describe Beau is Afraid? Introduce us to your film.
It's a film about a man who is riddled with anxiety, and it's about his trip to go visit his mother, which is frustrated by many, many things. That's maybe my coy, withholding way of pitching the film, but it's a nightmare comedy and an odyssey of sorts.
Before we get into the detail of what you've done and how you've done it, can you just explain the genesis of Beau? Because you started with Beau as a short movie back in 2011. Can you just explain how it started there and now has become this 3-hour epic?
Well, the short film was really just this exercise. I had just gotten out of school and I was moving out of my apartment. And 2 days before having to move, I realized, oh, this is a potential location, and I had no money. So I wrote something very quickly to be shot in that apartment. And the short itself is nothing special, but in the short, there was this idea of a man leaving his key in the door and then running, I'm on his way out the door. And then he has to run back in to grab something. And when he comes back, the key is missing. And that struck me as a strong catalyst for this kind of for an anxiety comedy. And so about 10 years ago, I wrote the first iteration of the Beau script that I then tried to get made. At that point, it was even more overtly a comedy. It was only interested in being funny and even more episodic. And I wasn't able to get it made. Wrote a few other things, wasn't able to get those made. Wrote Hereditary, that happened. Then after I made Midsommar, I just felt like I wanted to return to that world, which had always made me laugh. There was no idea that was too outrageous or strange, because the world itself was kind of governed by this nightmare logic.
You talked about how, in its original inceptions, it was more of an overt comedy, but there are so many just fleeting sight gags in the film that made me laugh out loud. I mean, I guffawed at Shiver Steve's grub for the grieved, which I thought was, the kind of thing that you almost don't notice it happening. And it seemed to me that the whole film is kind of like a shaggy dog story, in which the central thing is, what if your mother could hear all those things you say about her in therapy? Which seemed to me to be sort of the heart of the nightmare gag. Is that how you felt about it?
I see this film as kind of an elaborate Jewish joke. And you're right, it is a shaggy dog story. If it is a contribution to any specific tradition, I'd say it is a contribution to that of the picaresque, right? That was really the goal, was to make something that was really spacious, to make a film that kind of kept changing shape and changing tone and changing rhythm, but which is hopefully cohesive all the way through. And, I said the first draft was more overtly a comedy, but for me, if this isn't a comedy, then I don't know what it is, I was making myself laugh all the way through making it, and part of the joy of making the film was really packing this thing with as many gags as possible.
Tonally, there were two things that it reminded me of, and forgive me if neither of these are films that but there were moments that reminded me of Punch Drunk Love, of the central kind of, the driven character at the center of Punch Drunk Love. And at one point I started thinking about Synecdoche, New York, which was a film I never really understood, but as this kind of elaborate world was being kind of constructed, that kind of chimed a little bit with me. Do you have other films that you think about when you're making your work, or do you just take everything from your own head?
On this one, I was thinking more about books, and I was thinking more about certain writers. Like it's probably almost even too obvious to say, but Kafka was on my mind, and Borges, and as I said, the picaresque was a tradition that I was very conscious of while I was writing this. So I was thinking of Candide and Don Quixote and Tristram Shandy, but and I was always thinking about the Greeks, especially as we got to the ending, which to me is something should play almost like a Greek play written by Tennessee Williams or something. Films often come to mind while I'm making something. Sometimes they occur to me when I'm on the set. Sometimes they occur to me in post. When Beau enters the play, more than halfway through the film, that's an interlude that made me think of The Red Shoes pretty early on, or at least that was a film that kind of made me feel freer to do that. right?
And you're kind of referencing Powell and Pressburger's Matter of Life and Death toward the end as well, aren't you?
That's right. That's the sort of hellish tribunal at the end is what is something of a nod to the end of Matter of Life and Death, which is a much gentler film.
Yes.
But yeah, but also very funny. I mean, it's propaganda, but it's really it's beautiful and very funny. The ending of that film has always made me laugh.
I'm aware we're 10 minutes into the conversation, Ari, and we haven't mentioned Joaquin Phoenix, who is, I think, in every scene of a movie. And when that's 3 hours long, that's a lot of scenes. Tell us how you came to want Joaquin Phoenix to be your Beau.
Early on, into writing this, the thought kind of occurred to me that he would be the ideal person for this. He's such a vulnerable actor, and he throws so much of himself into everything he does, and it felt like what this film needed more than anything was somebody who could ground it, right? Or at least who himself could stay grounded within this world, because the world is so arch and so kind of unreal, right? And kind of harsh. And it was very important to just have somebody who could stay human all the way through that. I've wanted to work with him ever since I saw To Die For the first time. But the film that really, really excited me that he was in was actually I'm Still Here. Not only because I think that's one of the great comic performances, and it is a performance in every way.
What's he like to work with, Ari?
Amazing. He's not only a good guy and a very decent person, he brings such seriousness of purpose to what he's doing, but also a lightness that might surprise you. He's a very, very funny guy.
But it's interesting that the film that you cite as, one of your favorite performances is basically essentially watching somebody virtually torch their career in public. So it's almost like what you love about that film is that he's willing to go that far with a role. And you're right, it is a role, but watching that film is deeply uncomfortable because it is like watching somebody set fire to themselves in public.
Yeah, it's a conflagration. It is.
It is.
But it's beautiful for that reason, and it's I think it makes you question the nature of identity in that way, especially the idea of an actor having an identity and whether they're even entitled to one, right? Because their job is ultimately to give themselves away to whatever they're doing.
Can I ask you about the theme of family, Ari, and what is passed down from your family? It's clearly something that interests you, but what is it about the stuff that we inherit which makes it so fascinating to you?
Family is just an interesting place to start when you're thinking about drama at all, right? Because it's such an interesting situation, because we're born into these bonds that we have no control over, and there's no severing them, right? You can sever them, but even that trauma is something that can't really be shaken. For me, this film in many ways is third of a trilogy. And the idea was kind of like, once I decided to do this, okay, if I'm going to go back to these ideas, I want to stick like dynamite into them and kind of blow this thing up and kind of have the film eat itself, like eat its own head, basically. But
you and heads again.
Exactly, yeah. But there's an element of parody here that I think is important. The tongue is in the cheek in a lot of ways.
Imagine your family must be saying to you, enough already.
Ari, you are aware of the joke about the title of Hereditary, aren't you? Which is that Hereditary is called Hereditary because it's a pun on her head hit a tree.
I hadn't heard that. That's the first time.
I gift that to you.
Yes. And Florence Pugh, your star of Midsommar, obviously said, Ari, that you're basically a stand-up comedian at heart. Is she right?
Oh boy. Well, I like to laugh, and I'll leave it at that. I would not call myself a stand-up comedian.
And can I ask you to just briefly say something about working with Bobby Krilich and, what your relationship with him is like and how much you talk about the music with him?
Yeah, well, I love Bobby, and I wanted to work with him long before I made my first film, beginning with his self-titled album, The Haxan Cloak, which is pretty amazing. And I met Bobby before I made made Hereditary, and we really got along, had the same taste in music and films, and he's really like just a sweet person. And we worked together very, very well on Midsommar. I worked really well with Colin Stetson as well on Hereditary. That was an amazing collaboration, and I'd love to work with him again. But I brought him back on to Bobby, and it was just a pretty seamless collaboration. I should also nod to or name the music editor on this film, because she really she was pretty instrumental in this score kind of getting to where it landed. And her name is Catherine Miller, and she's brilliant. And I know that Bobby loves her as well. Like that, she was a big part of that process.
She just also mentioned on the subject of music, Everything I Own by Bread comes up at a crucial point, and Always Be My Baby by Mariah Carey comes up at a crucial point. Would you have been lost if you hadn't got permission for those tracks?
Yeah.
I'm not trying not to spoil anything, but
those were in the script. Those were pretty essential, and I was urged to find an alternative to the Mariah Carey song because it came with a price tag, but I could not, for the life of me, find anything that even competed. The other song was the Nina Simone song, which is a cover of "Isn't It a Pity," and that was another one that we just could not replace.
Ari, it's been a pleasure to have you on the program. I know you have a flight to catch, and I realized that this was very painful for you to come on the show. but we appreciate you spending some time with us. Thank you very much indeed.
I hope it wasn't too painful for you.
Not at all. We enjoyed it very much.
Thank you for having me.
And our thanks to Ari Aster for talking to us, even when he clearly didn't want to.
I think he enjoyed himself, actually.
I do think he enjoyed it, but he's just one of those, you either enjoy this kind of thing or you don't.
Yeah.
And some directors love telling their story, and he just, given that the whole movie is a nightmare, he has said before, this is his kind of nightmare, having to do press.
Yeah, but there was many more chuckles in that interview than I expected, which is great, and many more chuckles in the film than I expected. Although I should point out, we'll review it in 2 weeks' time, that I was aware of the fact that I saw it in a cinema with you and one other person,
and Sophie, who was on the show.
There were large sections in which I was the person laughing.
Correct. I think I laughed twice. Once. At the microwave meal, which Joaquin Phoenix has.
Because you want to just repeat what the name of it is.
Well, it says on the microwave meal, the best of Irish and Hawaiian cooking, or something like that, and it's called Aloha, but it's O''Loha. I mean, it's when you say it out loud, it's not funny, but when you see it, it wouldn't make it in the laughter lift, is what I'm thinking.
Did my laughing in the film annoy you, or did you just think I'm glad Kermode's enjoying it?
I just thought you're enjoying it more than I am. But anyway, to be reviewed in a couple of weeks' time, like you said. So what else can you review?
The Blue Caftan, which is a Moroccan Arabic language drama directed by Mariam Touzani. Halim and Mina run a traditional Kaftan store in one of Morocco's oldest Medinas. and they need to work faster in order to keep their customers. But the thing is that he is old school. He doesn't use machines. He does everything handcrafted. And he's very, very dedicated to his craft. So they take on Yusuf, who is an apprentice. And you immediately see in him a kind of an admiration for Yusuf. He believes that Yusuf could be an apprentice who will take on his trade. And his wife says, no, he won't. Like anybody else, he'll just end up being a delivery boy. But then she starts to become aware of there being something, beyond just the professional admiration. Is he interested in his craft, or is he interested in something else? Meanwhile, there's a scene very early on in which there's a bathhouse in which we see him gazing at the men in the bathhouse, and we understand that he's married, but he appears to be gay. And it also starts to become clear that this is something which is known within the marriage and which is obviously a source of some tension, but also a source of some resolution. The film premiered in the Uncertain Regard section at the 2022 Cannes Film Festival. As I always say, the Uncertain Regard, which is films that are regarded uncertainly by the festival. It was also Morocco's entry for the International Feature Film category at the Academy Awards. And on one level, it is about a covert, closeted gay relationship. On another level, it is a portrait of a marriage, and a rather beautiful portrait of marriage. There's a lovely scene when the husband and wife who, although there is clearly some level of estrangement with them in terms of his sexuality, they role play an argument between him and a customer, and it's very funny. She's very proud of his dedication to his craft. She says, "My husband is a malim, not a machine." They go to a cafe to watch a match, and she's punching the air, and she's smoking, and she's very feisty and independent. She's also unwell, and she's looking to the future. And they start to have conversations that make you realize that what's happening in this marriage is that they understand each other much better than you think they might do, and that they have accepted each other. I mean, at one point he says, "I tried all my life to suppress it. I could have brought shame on you." And she says, "I don't know any man as pure and noble as you." And I thought it was really, really affecting. Not least it's affecting because it has a score by, and forgive me if I mispronounce this, Christian Idis Andersen, who's a Danish composer and sound engineer, whose CV includes working with Von Trier on things like Antichrist, and more recently did that drama Vivarium. Now, do you remember we did interviews with Vivarium's stars? That was around about the time that lockdown was. It was just before lockdown, I think. Anyway, the music is really emotional and, maybe slightly melodramatic, but I like melodrama. And it's a very gentle film. And what's really impressive about it is a film about resolution, and it is about the marriage, even though it appears not to be.
And it's called?
The Blue Caftan.
Now, it's the ads in a minute, Mark, but first it's time once again to step into our very entertaining laughter lift.
Oh, goody.
Excellent. I have to say before we actually get underway here, that my fantastic He is Resin Indeed
Yes.
joke was appreciated by Liz Clutterbuck.
Oh, really? The Reverend Liz?
She of Clergy Corner, one of the first members. In fact, maybe she was the founder member of the Clergy Corner.
She was.
So,
About him, we used to sing, "Do the Clutterbuck, do the Clutterbuck. If you don't know how to do it, then you're out of luck."
Yes. What a fine song.
What a fine song.
Anyway, Mark, I was at a Ponzi gastropub in Showbiz North London over the bank holiday weekend when a very strange thing happened.
What was that?
In walks a mule from Moscow. He goes up to the bar and the barman says, "This is very odd. We've got a cocktail named after you." "You've got a cocktail called Dimitri?" He says, "Great, I'll have one of those, please."
I could actually see that coming
Moscow
quite
mule.
a long way off.
Vodka, ginger beer and lime juice actually sounds quite tasty.
I've had one of those.
Have you?
I've had one of those in the last 2 weeks.
And?
Yeah, it's quite tasty.
Anyway, I got back in from the pub and I thought the good lady ceramicist here indoors had been converted to the joys of horror films, because she was shouting at the telly, "Don't go in there! Don't go into the church! You know what's going to happen! No!" Turns out she was just watching our wedding video again.
That's good. That's a good joke.
Something of a row ensued and she picked up two of my favourite Queen records and threw them at me. I ducked just in time, but they shattered on the wall. Now she wants to break free. Sorry. Now she wants to break free. I'd rehearsed it as well. Now
I know.
Once you've introduced that song a number of times.
Yes.
Now
that's what it was. Is your DJ skill overrode your stand-up comedian skill? Yeah. And you said
he wasn't even the funniest Jared in the film.
That's right. This is Bachman Turner Overdrive.
Anyway, I spent the rest of the weekend telling people about the benefits of eating dried grapes. I was raising awareness. Thanks very much.
He is raisin.
He is resin. Indeed, Mark. That is it's gonna live on. That joke, I mean. So, what are you still doing in this?
I'm going to be reviewing Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3.
Now she wants to break free. Is the joke. I'll be back after this, unless you're a Vanguardista, in which case you're a mensch and your service will not be interrupted. Here we go with an email from Colonial Commoner, Heritage Listener, Vanguardista, first-time emergency mailer, Ben Smith, BSc, Economics, ONS, MWAM, MWAM.
What's that?
I can't remember what that is. Anyway.
MWAM.
He's an MWAM. Anyway, let's just assume we know. Dear Tout and Scalper, on the subject of earworms, while on a mindfulness course several years ago, the group was doing an exercise to sit quietly and listen intently to all the sounds that we could identify separately, whether from the room we were in or outside. I identified a fair number, but way less than many in the group. At the end of the exercise, I expressed concern around the difficulty I faced of identifying anything other than the louder, more obvious noises due to the near omnipresent jukebox which plays in my head. Another in the group piped up, I wish I had that. I don't hear music ever. To which I have a question, says Ben. Is this auditory aphantasia?
Oh, sorry, I don't hear music in my head ever. Yes.
To which I responded, be careful what you wish for. I don't think you realise what it's like. It's borderline pernicious. Then another of the group remarked that a surefire way to stop earworms is to sing Happy Birthday to yourself. And I did. And it worked, and it still does the job, usually.
Really?
Maybe not for really stubborn earworms, but it's pretty good. I sometimes let the music play, but if I need to concentrate or listen clearly to something else, a quick rendition generally does the trick. Other than briefly questioning how on earth could this work at the time of this genius revelation, I hadn't thought about it much. Rather, I simply delighted that there was a solution, a cure, in fact, because it really can be an affliction. I thought no more of it until hearing the recent discussion of earworms and possible cures on your show. Two things struck me after listening to the discussion and contributions from listeners. The first I realised was that the tunes in my mind's ear / internal jukebox were almost always songs where I didn't know all the words. And the second was that Happy Birthday met the requirements of a successful earworm cure as noted on the show. That is, a complete cycle or a finished song to satisfy the brain's need for completion and order. I would guess that someone wiser than me can tie this into visual imagination spectrum discussion of recent shows, but aside from that, I thought I should share with the congregation to see if this helps other people. Now I just need to fix the tinnitus. Okay. And also, Ben says, touts are referred to as scalpers here in Oz.
Yes.
Which is a bit more evocative, don't you think?
Yeah.
And then he has this fantastic abbreviated sign-off. Tinks, hello to Jace, love the show, relevant ups and downs, etc. So there you go. That'll work. So that's interesting. So singing Happy Birthday all the way through, which is obviously clearly just going to take a few seconds, but it does musically complete itself, should stop all earworms.
There was a comedian who there's a routine about somebody comes up to him and says, what's your name? And he goes, Jeffrey.
That is very good.
It's a good joke, isn't it?
That is very good.
But there is that idea of completion. I mean, I get songs stuck in my head so much that I will wake up and the song is playing like almost immediately when I wake up. And sometimes the thing for me that stops it is listening to the song, finding it on Spotify and actually playing it. But I do think there's something fascinating about the idea that if you play a piece of music that has a beginning, middle, and an end, and a completion point, that then satisfies the ticking thing. I mean, it reminds me. Remember when you used to have like a dance set record player with a spindle in the middle that you could load singles on, and if you there was an arm that would come across and would hold the records on the spindle. And if you just put the arm up, it would just play the same record over and over again. You remember that? Like it would automatically just keep playing it. And sometimes I have that thing about envisaging in my head, putting the arm back to stop the thing playing. But, you know, I just figured that everybody has songs. I mean, you must, because you...
Well, as soon as Earworm, as soon as that email, I read the email the first time, the track that came into my head, which it does every time because on Scala I used to play it all the time, is the Justin Hurwitz music from First Man, which is The Landing, which is just a fantastic piece of music. And obviously, if we didn't have to pay a fortune, we'd now play a part of it, but we won't. And that's the piece that it just goes around on a loop, just goes round and round and round and round. And it's a fantastic piece of music, which when you hear the tracks, like 6 minutes, has a proper beginning and an end. But in my head, it just does the same bit.
But I presume that since you are a music DJ, the music DJ, that you are constantly thinking about music. You must constantly have a tune in your head.
Yes, probably. And I certainly have music on the whole time, all of the time, unless I'm writing, in which case I can't.
You have it on in the car. You have it when I come to your house. You have it on. Yeah. You've always got a playlist that you'll. I
put music on over dinner, even if no one else wants to hear it.
And you mentioned that thing about whether people notice it, because I always do when I come into your house and I go, "What is that?" Or
yes, a lot of people just don't notice. It's just a wash. But Charlie Mackesy, as in The Dog, the Boy, the Thief, and His Lover.
Now that's a film I would pay good money to see.
I had a cup of tea with him, and he was just immediately in tune with the music that was playing. And which was Arvo Pärt and Spiegel im Spiegel. He just noticed that it was there straight away, and you just think, okay, it's just interesting that some people tune into it and some people don't. Yeah. And which actually is a very, very nice lead into Guardians of the Galaxy, which is as a series has always taken the music and cassettes and all that kind of retro stuff very seriously.
Exactly. So if you remember the very beginning of the
good lead in, I thought
that was really well done.
Yeah, thanks.
Spoiled rather by the fact that you just flagged it up, but there we go.
Yeah. Well, I just think it's worth if something goes well,
it's worth.
I might screw up a joke, but I'm just cueing a nice thing here. Anyway.
So if you remember the first Guardians of the Galaxy opens, with Chris Pratt doing that. It's almost like a dance number, isn't it? And then he grabs a sort of weird thing and sings into it, and and that's the whole. Then there's the whole thing about the Walkman and why the music, is constantly playing in his head. And there was also a weird crossover, wasn't there? Because when The Martian happened, there was the whole thing about The Martian that the only thing he's got is the disco playlist that he's stuck behind. So there was a kind of
Rodney's Red Planet,
which is a joke I wish that I had made, but I didn't. Who was he? Was it you?
It was genuinely me.
It was genuinely you. You genuinely came up with that joke. So I remember when I first saw Guardians of the Galaxy, the thing that I really loved about it was a breath of fresh air. It was a hoot. It was also a hit, obviously spawned sequels. This declares itself to be, the third and, closing installment of the Guardians of the Galaxy. This is returning director James Gunn. The team are back. They're getting used to life on Nowhere. Dave Bautista is Drax the Destroyer, who, of course, is actually a sweetheart. Karen Gillan is Nebula, proving that there really is life after Doctor Who. Pom Klementieff, I'm never sure about that pronunciation. I'm terrible. Is the empathic Mantis. Vin Diesel is Groot, who only ever says, "I am Groot," and actually he's a tree anyway. So when I say Vin Diesel is Groot, Bradley Cooper is Rocket, the genetically engineered raccoon, because obviously there's a lot of make-up stuff. And then Pratt is back as Peter Quill, aka Star-Lord, who is still in love with Zoe Saldana's Gamora, who died and then came back as a different version of herself, who doesn't love or remember him in the way that he does her. Here's a clip.
I miss you so much. And maybe if you open yourself up to it, there's a possibility.
I don't think so, Quinn.
Quill.
I don't think so.
Well, what I'm trying to say is...
Peter, this is an open line, right?
What?
We're listening to everything you're saying.
And it is
Painful. And you're just telling me now?
We were hoping it would stop on its own.
But I switched it over to private.
What color button did you push?
Blue, for the blue suit. Oh, no.
Blue is the open line for everyone.
Orange is for blue.
What?
Black is for orange. Yellow is for green. Green is for red, and red is for yellow.
No, yellow is for yellow. Green is for red, red is for green.
I don't think so.
Try it then.
Hello! You were right.
That's funny.
Yeah, exactly. And there is a lot of that. There's a lot of the funny wisecracking between them. And there's a lot of the, the well-chosen needle drop retro hit jukebox stuff. What there also is, which if people know about the film, they'll know this, but because I didn't read anything about it beforehand, is there is also a lot more darkness. So this time, Rocket becomes the central character. He's wounded in an attack by Will Poulter's warlock, and they then try to make him better. And by trying to make him better, they find out that he has a kill switch built into him, because obviously he's genetically modified, and his backstory has always been somewhat hidden. And the rest of the film then shifts between flashbacks to his backstory, how he became Rocket, and the mission to find and disarm the kill switch, which is in him. Now, as I said, previous installments, funny, action-packed. It has that, but it also has this weirdly melancholic and often very dark stuff about the animal experiments. I mean, you remember things like the Plague Dogs and Richard Adams, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
A long time ago.
Yeah. So there is something genuinely affecting, and believe me, no one was more surprised by this than I was, affecting and distressing about the scenes in which the character who becomes Rocket is one of a number of creatures who are being experimented on to accelerate their evolution in order to create a new utopian society, obviously in a way which is very twisted in an Island of Dr. Moreau. And during that stuff, I became very affected by it. I mean, to the point that actually at one point I teared up, and I'm sure I'm not the only person, because the way in which the animation of that is done is very convincing. And the problem with it is that then when you have the other stuff, it kind of feels to me like it's almost two different movies. So I think this is 2.5 hours long. It is overlong and it is baggy. There is a great 89-minute movie in there, which is basically the Rocket backstory, which is really, oddly kind of oddly touching in a way which I hadn't expected it to be. Then when you get back to, the starship fighty, runny, jumpy, smashy, crashy, boom, all that stuff, not so interested. And I did kind of find that towards the inevitable big climax, it sort of lost some of its oomph. But there is in the middle of that, and obviously this is partly a kind of personal thing, but in the middle of all of this, there is a film about vivisection and animal experimentation, which even in the context of it being a Guardians of the Galaxy fantasy about the creation of Rocket, is oddly poignant and just reminded me that science fiction has a way sometimes of dealing with issues that just catch you completely off guard. So I was sort of surprised. I mean, it was an evening screening that I went to, and it was full because I think it was the multimedia screening. It did seem to be playing very well with the audience. The audience gave a big round of applause at the end. So clearly fans of the series are getting what they need out of it. But do be warned, there be beasts and darkness in here. And I actually think that's for the good.
And it's volume 3.
Guardians of the Galaxy, volume 3. Although when I saw it was volume 11, mate.
And
this is Bachman Turner Overdrive. Sorry.
Is that the end? Or is there?
Well, we know that at least the characters can reappear in other ways, but the Guardians of the Galaxy, that is a self-contained trilogy.
Okay, that's done. Let's do What's On now. This is where you email us a voice note about your festival or special screening from wherever you are in the world. Send it to correspondence@kermodeandmayo.com. Here we go with this week's.
Hello, Mark and Simon. This is Sue from In Short Europe, an exciting short film festival taking place at the Ciné Lumière Cinema at the French Institute in South Kensington on the 12th and 13th of May, showcasing over 20 short films from around Europe. There will also be special Q&As. Check out the Ciné Lumière website for more details.
Hi Simon and Mark. Lost Reels is launching a new 16mm film series of classics, curios, and forgotten gems, all shown from vintage 16mm film prints. With inspired double bills and 2-for-1 pricing, our first event, Monsters Attack, features sci-fi horror on May the 13th at the Cinema Museum in London. Details at lostreels.co.uk.
So that was Sue from In Short Europe, a short film festival in Cine Linear Cinema in South Kensington in London. And then Jeff Badger promoting Lost Reels new film series, the first event May the 13th and the Cinema Museum in London. Just let us know, because they were both in London. You can send us stuff from wherever you are.
Yes.
From wherever you are, and we'd love to put it on. Send your voice note to correspondence@kermodemayo.com. That is the end of Take One. This has been a Sony Music Entertainment production. Did you know that?
I was aware that they were paying the checks.
Excellent. The team was Lily Hamley, Ryan O'Meara, Sancho Panza, Gully Tickell, Sophie Ivan, Basaka and Johnny Socials. Hannah Talbot was the producer. Simon Paul was the redactor. Mark, what is your film of the week?
Return to Seoul.
Thank you for listening. Our extra takes with a bonus review, a bunch of recommendations, and even more stuff about the movies and cinema adjacent television is available right now because these things landed together. Take 3 will arrive in your device's inbox next Wednesday. Thanks very much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed watching it as much as we enjoyed making it. While you're here, check out all the other videos because they're cool too, aren't they?
Yeah, and if you want to keep up to date with everything Kermode and Mayo's Take, then check out our social channels.
I mean, why wouldn't you?
I mean, I would. I have done.
Excellent.